Alrighty. Hi, chat. Welcome back. Welcome to another episode of Molecast. Our Molecast today is, is basically the sound of stress. And we are going to be looking at today the science behind stress and how this affects musicianship. So, it's really good to see you guys again. It's kind of funny because as I was prepping for this episode today, I was like, bruh, I'm making an episode about stress and I'm feeling stress. Like this, what is this? What's going on? But I am hoping that today, after we talk about all the science behind stress and how to cope with stress, I feel like I've grown from the last time I've done a Molecast episode on how I manage stress, and hopefully you guys do too. But before we get into musicianship stress, the science behind stress, I do have a couple server announcements as usual. Don't forget that the server recital is coming up this upcoming Saturday, August 22nd at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That will be in the recital hall room and the recital hall chat. Good luck to everyone who is performing. And I just realized, this is so timely. Who knew? When I planned this episode, I did not intend for it to fall right before the server recital. So hopefully it helps everyone performing too. Also, if you're unable to make the server recital on Saturday, the next day is Cadenza's solo recital. That's going to be on August 23rd at 11:30 a.m. And Cadenza is a member of our community who he's going to do a solo recital on Bach Chaconne, which is a favorite of mine. As well as the entire Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto unaccompanied. He's done a couple practice videos before with Ray. I remember hearing the Tchaikovsky. It sounded amazing. I highly encourage you to check out both performances if you're able to, or one or the other, but we are a very talented community. So I highly encourage you to check that out. Also, if you have any recitals or events coming up, please let me know. I always check pin messages in general, but you can also DM me. That way I can shout out your event here on the Molecast. And then also, as always, before we get into the main part of the podcast, I always like to give these disclaimers. As always, I, Mole, am speaking as a PhD student in molecular biology. I am not speaking of the opinion of Ray Chen or any of his accounts, social media accounts or otherwise. This is totally my opinion. As also, I am not a medical professional. I do not have an MD. I do not have a DO. And this is also really important to mention as well. Stress and anxiety, even though this podcast will be entirely light, funny, wholesome, stress and anxiety can lead to some can be symptoms of more serious diseases such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmune disease, cancer, and mental illness. If you or someone you know is really struggling with stress and anxiety, I strongly encourage you to reach out to a parent, a guardian, a trusted friend, medical personnel, or one of the numerous hotlines that are available for you to have help. We are a wholesome community. We want everyone to be happy, healthy, and safe. So I always encourage you, if you're having these thoughts, having these feelings, please reach out. And Justina reminded me, as I'm now looking in general chat, if you're interested in science, if you're a scientist, aspiring scientist, or someone who just vibes with science, please feel free to join our science server. The link is in the chat. We have many different discussions on many different branches of science, mathematics, psychology, and political science. I also offer the Molecast questions in the science server. Sometimes I do them here in general too, but mainly it's in the Science server, as well as Instagram. And please come and vibe with our community. Awesome. All right. So let's just get into it. So actually, coming right off of that wonderful plug for the Science server. Oh my gosh. Totally forgot. Before we go into the podcast, I have one other shout out I have to give. Don't forget, we are being hosted by the Ray Chen Violin server. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to all of Ray's social media accounts: Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. I barely use my Facebook. I think the only time of year I use my Facebook was like 2 weeks ago, for my birthday. And, so don't forget to plug that. If you need to take a break though from Instagram because of that bread video, I understand. It took me a bit. I listened to it. That song was stuck in my head for a while. I had to cleanse and recenter, refocus. But again, please support Ray in his social media accounts and thank him for no, he did not post another bread video. Oh no. Okay. No. This is a safe place here. Of course he would do it during Molecast. So yeah, again, please support Ray and his social media accounts. We thank him for allowing us to host the Molecast here. So, all right, now let's get into the Molecast. Now they've done all the plugs, now they've done all the announcements. Stress. It's something that we're all familiar with as musicians, as performers, heck, even just giving this Molecast presentation. We all know the symptoms. Your hands get clammy, you feel the butterflies in your stomach, you start to sweat, your breath, you feel a little more breathy. And these are all signs of feeling stressed. And on the Science server and on Instagram this week, I asked the following question to people who were following both of those accounts. Besides performances and recitals, what is the most stressful part of conservatory, music school, or just music? And, the answers that we had were remarkable. Some of these, when I read them, I had to check back in with myself as I was like, oh my gosh, I totally identify with this. So I'm going to read some of these responses to you. Some of them were, pretty standard, like, getting ready for lessons, making sure that, you didn't forget your music, having things such as, competitions, both the actual event of competitions and like competing with other people, time management, playing tests, rehearsals, socialization, trying to balance music and other life events. And for someone, I can see for someone who is who's going into music school or is a professional musician, this is very different than someone like me who's an amateur musician. My main profession is being a PhD student, but trying to balance that time between, practicing and music making versus all the other responsibilities that we have in life is definitely a struggle. Other really interesting stressors were very specific to the global pandemic that we're experiencing now. Someone wrote in, and I believe this was on Instagram, they were deciding whether or not to pursue a career in music because they saw that a lot of people who had jobs in music right now were currently unemployed. And this person was getting ready to go into music school, and they felt they weren't sure whether or not that this was a wise move in today's economy and climate. And it's amazing how in this pandemic, there are so many additional stressors besides the normal stressors that musicians deal with, stand partners and the culture of self-doubt and, being competitive. But we now have this additional fear of, will I find a job? Will I be employed? Is this the right move? And, when we look at these stressors, we can compartmentalize them into two different kinds of stressors. We have both external stressors, which is stress from the external environment. And these things can include jobs, noise, trauma, injury, relationships with others, etc. Things that our selves are experiencing right now in the moment. And we also have internal stress. And internal stress is something that determines our body's ability to respond to and deal with the external stress. Thoughts, feelings, sleep, health, attitudes. And when we compartmentalize these things, when we look at external and internal stress, these help us to identify whether the stress is coming from ourselves or whether the stress is coming from the outside. But the important thing is that no matter where the stress is coming from, this will lead to either an acute stress response, or if the stressor, which is either external or internal, is continually ongoing, this can lead into chronic stress. So let's go ahead and dive right into the science. Let's identify what an acute stress response is. And, when I was researching this, and when I do the research for most Molecasts, I get so into the science that I always have to remember to reconnect it to the music community at large. But the acute stress response is something that we all know as either the fight or flight response. And this is our body's immediate response to a perceived threat, challenge, or scare. And it's mainly described as being immediate, intense, and or thrilling. And I was like, is it thrilling? Like, the only time I think of an acute stress response as thrilling is if I'm on a roller coaster. But if someone's like, hey, do you want to do a recital? I'm like, oh, no. Yeah, no. In fact, actually, this past week, my department reached out to me and said, hey, Mole, we need someone to give a presentation on their research to our new first-year students in September. Would you be willing to do this? And my stomach was at its normal place and went right down to my feet. That is not thrilling. But, the best part is, even though we feel terrible in the moment of an acute stress response, biologically, a single episode of acute stress doesn't necessarily cause problems. However, some of the symptoms that you might feel in the moment is you might feel stomach problems, tension headaches. There's a bunch of other symptoms, but in the moment, overall, it's not bad for your body to have an acute stress response. So let's dive into the actual mechanism that goes on during the acute stress response. So when your body encounters a stress response, let's use Molecast, for example. When I woke up this morning, my brain was like, oh my gosh, Molecast is today. The first thing that goes off is the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the main part of the brain that perceives danger. And what happens with the hypothalamus is it triggers the HPA axis, which is basically the hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal axis. And it's a network of both the brain, your adrenal glands, and a bunch of other systems that work together in order to produce this flight or flight response. And you guys might know the main response that's involved in a flight or fight response. This is going to be a struggle all morning. I can already tell. Which is basically noradrenaline and adrenaline. And these two hormones are in flux. So when we're not in the middle of a stress response, adrenaline and noradrenaline is low. But when we perceive a stressor, noradrenaline is then activated. So when we're at rest state, noradrenaline is higher whenever we wake up, and it decreases during the day. So then when we're ready to sleep, we don't have a noradrenaline response, or it's very, very low. And adrenaline also allows us, is also in flux. But during a stress response, what happens is when noradrenaline and adrenaline are produced, we see the following symptoms. We see an increase in tears. We see an increase in blood flow. More calories are being burned. We see an increase in blood pressure. We also see an increase in blood sugar levels and blood output. So our bodies are literally getting ready to either fight or flight from the response that is coming towards us. Surprisingly, though, what I found was that our digestive activity is decreased, and there's a third hormone that is being produced, which is known as cortisol. So cortisol is actually really, really important, because with cortisol, what happens is it allows us to increase the level of energy fuel that's available. So it basically takes glucose and fatty acids from the liver, and it breaks them down. So when you wake up in the morning, that's why you're super hungry, because your body's like, oh my gosh, I need to break down sugar. So when Ray wakes up and he comes to chat, usually the first thing he says is, oh, I'm going to get cereal, BRB, and this dude never returns. But this declines during the day. So we're not having cortisol active continuously. It's really active the first thing we get up in the morning and decreases during the day. But when we encounter a stress response, cortisol is increased. And cortisol also has a huge role in regulating the immune system. And just a little bit of backstory for those who are new in the Molecast. My research is focused on how the body responds to virus infection. So the immune system is near and dear to my heart. And when I read that the immune system is affected during stress, I was like, what? How? Oh my gosh, this is destiny. And what happens is that during acute immune response or acute stress response, we do see an activation of a certain type of immune response. And this immune response is more important for wound repair, but not for fighting off pathogens. The immune response that is important for fighting off pathogens is actually decreased during this time. So you're more susceptible to a virus infection, a bacterial infection. But because an acute stress response doesn't last that long, it's no big deal. It only becomes a problem if you have a chronic stress response. So a stress response that lasts for a long, long time. So yeah, I know, right? And as I was researching more and more about cortisol is actually important for a lot of different things in the body. We see that cortisol is important in regulating salt and water in the body. So what happens is that when you have an increase in cortisol, you'll also have an increase in sodium levels and a decrease in potassium levels. Why is this important? Well, if you have an imbalance between sodium and water, that might mean that your heart works harder and it's causing damage to your heart over time. And we also see that cortisol is important for the modification of certain parts for certain neural networks, because again, cortisol is working with the hypothalamus to produce this stress response. So in an acute stress response, this is okay, because this is a short-term, fight or flight response. Your body is alert. It's conserving energy and channeling it towards the responses that are important, which is high energy, responding to the stressor, and hopefully getting through the stressor. Stress, however, becomes a problem when we have it prolonged for a long, long time. So chronic stress, the official definition, is the response to emotional pressure suffered for a prolonged period of time in which an individual perceives that they have little or no control. And I felt this so much. I felt this so much because I am someone who likes to have control of my environment, of what's going on around me. And when I read that chronic stress is that someone is perceiving that they have little or no control of their environment, I was like, oh no. Is this me? Existential crisis. But, you know, as we continue through the podcast, it's all good. But initially when I read it and I was doing the research, I was like, have I been making horrible life choices this entire time? Have I gone through my 20s just stressed out for no reason? So the persistent stress can lead to health problems, headaches, insomnia, and usually chronic stress is a result of when external or internal stressors pile up and stick around, and our body and our minds cannot process the stressors around us. And some of the symptoms of, you know, what happens during chronic stress in cells. So what happens is that this is continual activation of cortisol. So I told you guys that cortisol is important for, you know, regulating salt and water balance. It helps to activate the certain immune responses and repress other immune responses. And it also results in impaired communication between the immune system and the brain network. And surprisingly enough, or maybe not surprisingly enough, chronic stress is linked to chronic fatigue, metabolic disorders, immune disorders, and a whole host of other diseases. So chronic stress is bad, essentially. So, you know, and in the terms of a musician, if we have chronic stress, this can actually translate into our music. So something that I feel is very very non-useful is when my instructor, my teacher for my violin lessons tells me, you know, Mo, I sense that you're having tension in your playing. I'm sensing a lot of tension in your left hand or in your bowing hand. And I always tend to get more tense afterwards. I'm like, wait, this is not what should be happening. And, you know, I asked in general, maybe it was last week or the week before, if other instrumentalists also experience this issue. And yes, they do. Pianists talk about having a lot of muscle tension in their backs. There's also tension in your legs, your shoulders, your jaw if you're a woodwind instrument, also in the head. Another thing that I noticed is that if you're trying to express emotion through your playing, so sometimes my instructor will tell me, Mo, you need to express more emotion here. I'm just really not feeling it. I just get even more tense. And I'm like, why? Why is this happening? You're telling me to actively relax, and I feel like I'm working harder. And what was really interesting was that when I mentioned this in one of the practice rooms as I was doing my research, Q, and I think it was Q, mentioned that you should be trying to express emotion through your playing and not through your body. And that really got me onto a different line of thinking as to how we produce music. You know, we see amazing soloists, Ray, Hilary Hahn, etc., who, when they're playing music, they really put their heart and souls into the music. And, you know, we joke about how, you know, Ray's eyebrows tend to move a lot during certain pieces. Or, you know, we see other soloists that just really get captured into the music. But at the same time, if you're not able to play freely, or if you're not experienced in reducing tension while you're playing, this could also result in additional tension in your body. So looking at the science, we know that chronic stress is bad for our cells. it leads to a dysregulation of immune function, which is really important now in this day and age, especially in the time of coronavirus. We want to make sure that our immune systems are in tip-top shape. It's also important for music production, because if we're tense, we're not able to free that music. So how are we able to reduce and relieve stress? And I looked at 2 different sources trying to examine how we can reduce or relieve stress, both in our personal lives and in our music making. So first, I'm going to read off the suggestions that are from the United States government as well as the UK government. And then I'm going to go into some of the things that I found online and through a book that I had that helped to reduce stress for musicians. And we'll see whether or not the science backs this up. So first is to be observant, to recognize the signs of your body's response to stress. And this is very true. By being observant, we can tell whether or not we're having an acute or chronic stress response, and whether or not the stress response that we are observing has been prolonged for a long period of time. Talk to your healthcare provider. Yes, this is something that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, and it's also important to mention again, to start the conversation and get proper care for existing or new health problems, and that there are effective treatments for management of anxiety. Get regular exercise. This is actually really important because self-fitness is important for managing stress properly and to make sure that our cells aren't being damaged during an acute stress response. So the government suggests to exercise at least 30 minutes a day. I believe the UK government suggests exercising at least an hour a day. Exercising in general is just a good thing. You should do it. If you take a quick jog, maybe do some cardio. Spoiler alert, I am horrible with exercise. The only exercise I can do is maybe like a long walk. And I'm like, oh man, that was way too much exercise. I'm good. I can just see the chat now saying like, nope, exercise is not what we do. But actually exercise is important because exercise helps to keep not only our cells fit, but it also helps to work off some of the tension that we may have during a stress response. But if exercise is not for you, you can also try a relaxing activity. Both the US and the UK government suggest to explore relaxation or wellness programs, such as meditation, muscle relaxation, or breathing exercises. And when I looked into the research to see whether or not muscle relaxation or breathing exercises would be beneficial, the research is very, very sound that breathing exercises do help to increase oxygen for blood flow, since we do have an increase in blood flow during a stress response. So it helps to keep our cells properly oxygenated. Muscle relaxation is important because, again, we know that cortisol is important for regulating salt and potassium and water. Sodium and potassium are also important for good muscle health. So by participating in muscle relaxation, we can help with that response as well. And meditation is just good for many things in general. It helps you to keep focused on the music at hand, and it helps to shift the mindset from focusing on your fear to focusing on what your body is actively doing, which also helps to lessen the fight or flight response or perception of danger. The government also suggested to set goals and priorities. Decide what must get done now and what can wait. Learn to say no to new tasks if you start to feel like you're taking on too much. Oh, this one I felt hit so close to home to me because I am the person who cannot say no. I cannot say no. If someone comes to me and says, please help me with X, Y, or Z. Oh, hey, do you mind doing this to me? I am the first person to say, yes, no problem. I will put down whatever I am doing, pick up the, baton and run with it. Oh, yes. People pleasers gang. I see you. I see you. And it's funny. My friends, my in real life friends, are also listening to the podcast. And right now they're probably pausing this part of the podcast and saying, yes, yes, Mole is finally recognizing she has a problem. And I do. And, after I got over feeling attacked and saying, look, I do have issues saying no. I agree. Deciding what must get done now and what can wait helps to reduce the danger that we're looking at from a bunch of different tasks to only one or two. And we're better able to respond to danger if the danger seems small. So we can actually fight it instead of running away. Sometimes, and this is definitely for me, I'm not sure about the rest of you, but when I have a bunch of tasks on my plate and it feels incredibly overwhelming, I'm a textbook avoider. I will avoid the task at hand until I absolutely cannot avoid it anymore. I know it is unhealthy. I know it is wrong, but that's just the way that I respond when I'm incredibly stressed. And it doesn't have to be like an actual task. It can be like people messaging me. If it's incredibly stressful, I will avoid the DM. I will avoid the text message until I absolutely cannot anymore. And it's so hard. I know I have a problem, and hopefully this podcast, after recording it, will help me to work through that problem. And I think as I work through this avoiding strategy and learning to say no, the most important step, in my opinion, is that the government gives is to stay connected. You are not alone. Keep in touch with people who can provide emotional support and practical help, like the people, in real life, like the people here in the Discord community. And also, don't be afraid to ask for help. I am also someone who cannot ask for help. I'm like, no, it's fine. Like, I can carry the load on my own. I will climb up the mountain. Who asks for help? Like, that's just a sign of weakness. It's not. Like, and again, I'm sure everyone who is listening to this Molecast right now is like, okay, fine. Like, you're telling me to do all these steps and you cannot, do them yourself. Asking for help sometimes is useful because it takes something that seems very unmanageable or something that our brains are perceiving as very large, and it's breaking it down to small steps. Things that if someone else, let's say Annie, for example, helps me out with a part of Molecast, that's one less thing that I have to worry about during the production of Molecast. And it helps for me to perceive the danger, in air quotes, as being less. And even if, let's say, it's not so much like actual tasks that people can help you with, it's just oh my gosh, I'm feeling so stressed. Spoiler alert, before I go into these Molecasts, I'm DMing Justina, I'm DMing Annie, I'm DMing a bunch of other people, and I'm going, oh my gosh, it's Molecast, I'm so nervous, what am I going to do, what if this sucks, and just connecting with those guys, they helped to ground me, and they said, no, it's going to be fine. The worst case scenario is it's just us in a practice room talking, and they helped keep me grounded, and you all helped to keep me grounded. So it is really, really important to stay connected. So if we look at the science behind, how to manage stress according to the government, looking at it from a science perspective, these are all very, very sound ways to manage and relieve stress. And thank you so much for all the blob loves that I'm seeing in the chat right now. It's really warming my heart. And it really does mean a lot for me. All right, so now moving away from the ways that we can generally reduce and relieve stress. Yes, Go-Go, I did notice you. I then asked the question, well, something that is a stressor in all of our lives is performances and recitals. And we have 2 recitals coming up on Saturday and Sunday. So what is suggested to help manage anxiety during a performance? And is it actually based in sound science? So first off, I did a Google search of performance anxiety, and I think it was literally, how do I manage anxiety during, or how do I manage stage fright? Do not type, how do I manage performance anxiety? It will not be the same thing. The steps I came up with were actually really interesting. And I think some of them we have to go through one by one. First, the ones that are completely backed up by science. Limit caffeine and sugar. I am looking at my coffee cup right now, and I am thinking to myself, was coffee the right choice before Molecast? But it was. I need coffee. Coffee is my love. But there is science behind it. Caffeine and sugar only give you short-term energy. And if you're in the middle of a performance and you have short-term energy, it could cause you to experience a crash during the performance or even right before you're supposed to go on. So that's also a risk that you take. Deep breathing. I mean, we just talked about deep breathing, but again, the science behind it is very sound, as well as exercising and eating well. There's a lot, and we're going to get into this in a little bit. There's a lot about diet and performance anxiety that is debunked. So just so we're all aware, eating well is the best strategy. Make sure you have a balanced diet. However, there are some other things that I definitely wanted to discuss when I did the general Google search. And actually, I just looked up at the chat, and that's actually a really good point, Jess. Some stress responses, myself included, I cannot eat right before a performance. I had a back-to-back concert right before we went into the pandemic, and I could not eat until 1 a.m. And it's actually very normal. During a stress response, our bodies will increase cortisol production, and with the increase in cortisol production, we actually have reduced digestive activity. So a lot of people will complain about feeling kind of queasy before going on stage, or they just don't feel hungry at all. I'm of the camp that I will get kind of queasy, so I just stay away from food. Like, I have not had breakfast. I can only manage liquids. After I'm done with Molecast, I'll probably make a bowl of cereal or something. But for some people, they feel that they can't eat beforehand. Other people, however, do eat before a performance, which kind of leads me into the next point that was suggested, which is to establish a routine. And if you didn't listen to the previous Molecast episode 3, where we talk about sleep, I recommend that you do that. Because again, our cells are very ingrained in routine. We operate on a 12-hour wake cycle and a 12-hour sleep cycle. But also routine is important for us to lessen danger. If we have a pre-performance routine, we are able to perceive the danger of a performance or recital as something that is a lot less versus not having a routine and perceiving the entire event as being a danger because it's new. For example, my routine before Molecast is I usually listen to a couple of my favorite podcasts, kind of get myself into the podcast mood. And then I will also review my notes, usually about like 2 hours before the Molecast. Then an hour before the Molecast, I'll usually come into the main server, say hi, message everybody, and then like 15 to 30 minutes before the Molecast, send out the science server announcement, and then we're ready to go. And by having that routine, it helps to lessen the danger, or my perceived danger, of speaking in front of y'all before the Molecast. But I think what's generally, and something that we all have to accept, myself included, is that anxiety is a normal part of any performance. Like, it is. Anxiety allows us to, it allows us to be human. And when people tell us, you should go in and be incredibly relaxed and super chill, something that was overwhelmingly found in both the government websites and the musician websites is that anxiety is just a normal part of performance. And that you should take the anxiety that you feel towards a performance and channel it into whatever you're doing. So, for example, Annie, when you have a ton of anxiety playing Smash against Ray on live stream, the suggestion is that you should take that anxiety and channel it into destroying Ray, which I wholeheartedly support. I have a vision now that as soon as I put this up on YouTube, I am going to get either a DM or an Instagram story from Ray calling me out saying, "Mo, what have you done?" But accepting the anxiety, also putting it in terms of performance. When I had the recital, I guess now a couple months ago, channeling my anxiety into my performance was both a blessing and a curse, because I had enough anxiety that the energy of playing Chardas like literally came out during my playing, but I had so much anxiety that I know I messed up certain sections. So it's kind of this nice balance. And literally leading right off of that, it's also important to prepare ahead of time. Practice. I know, going back to the Smash example, Annie practices Smash like all the time, and she is very dedicated into what she does. So when she does have, do you practice every day, Annie? Maybe I've misspoken. Okay, good. And it's really for whatever we're interested in. I am now getting back into practicing violin every day. I know that there are some of you on the server that practice in the practice rooms every day, or close to every day. But it's important to work towards whatever performance or recital that we're aiming towards, whether it's the server recital on Saturday or a future server recital, or even an audition for music schools, because those are coming up. I think I just saw the email for our university's audition process like last week. But by practicing, we are also helping to reduce the stress that we're going to be experiencing during our audition, our performance, our recital, because we're preparing to the best of our ability. And even though we do prepare to the best of our ability, we also prepare in additional ways by being organized and planning out and visualizing what we want to happen. Not necessarily saying that it will happen, but we're preparing in such a way, such as making sure we have the right sheet music, making sure that we do the correct articulations on a particular piece of music, correct fingerings, making sure we have all the paperwork if you're doing an audition or some sort of competition. Having that visualization of all the things that we want to go correctly during a performance, and also possibilities of ways that it could go wrong. Sometimes I like to ask the question, okay, What happens if I forget my sheet music? Is there a place that I could go get an additional copy, or should I memorize the sheet music? Spoiler alert, my memory is crap, so memorizing sheet music is a real struggle for me. We're getting there, but, you know, there's a lot of nonsense that floats up here. We're working on it. We're working on it. I'm getting much better. Now that I've been playing more and more, my memory has been coming back. But visualizing also helps. And the idea behind preparing, visualization, and accepting the anxiety and practicing is all based in the science of perceiving the danger to be less. Because again, this is a fight or flight response. Unfortunately, we cannot completely remove the anxiety. We can only reduce it. So by doing all this prep work beforehand, when we actually come up against the danger, it'll be a lot smaller and a lot more manageable. So the science behind that is very, very sound. Also, another interesting point that was mentioned was trying to make connections with the audience. Trying to put yourself in the audience's shoes. You know, for most people, unless you're an international soloist, most people are coming just to listen to you. They're not coming, or it's your family or your very, very close friends. They're coming to listen to the music, and they're coming to enjoy the music. If it's your family and close friends, sometimes they're usually coming to see you, but, you know, they'll usually accept you for who you are and everything you've done. So put yourself into their shoes. When you come to listen to the music, you're probably a little more accepting of mistakes and errors than you think in your mind as a performer. We aspire for perfection, but we'll never reach it. So by in the moment of the performance, trying to enjoy it as much as you can. And this is something that can only happen if we take the steps beforehand by reducing the danger and managing the perceived danger through practice, preparation, and visualization, and establishing a routine. So, and then something that yesterday, as I'm finishing up preparation for Molecast, and I'm going through all the links, I see someone say, oh, you know what you should do? You should eat bananas before a recital or a performance because that helps with stress. And I was like, okay, I have to investigate this. Is this true? Do bananas actually help with managing stress? So I did the research, and so let's get this down first. The banana peel and the banana pulp, or the actual banana itself, do have serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. And the amounts of serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline do exceed the normal amounts that we have in our bodies at that time. However, I could not find a study that actually examined how much dopamine or noradrenaline that our bodies absorb after consuming banana pulp or banana peel. You can eat the banana peel. So I am from the Western world where I have not gotten out much. I'm now in Chicago. I'm experiencing so many new things. But you can eat the banana peel. And the banana peel has a lot more serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline than the pulp. And the other thing that I discovered is that when you have an unripened banana, there are lower levels of dopamine. As the banana begins to ripen, the dopamine levels increase to a peak point. And then when it's at peak ripeness, that's the highest amount of dopamine that you can have. But then as the banana becomes over-ripened, the levels of dopamine actually decrease. And I was just floored. I was completely floored Lord. I was like, wait, you're losing dopamine? I always thought, like, if I have an overripened banana, it was, like, the best for me. But apparently, no. Like, you're starting to already lose nutrition by that point. But the only study I could find, and let's get a couple things straight right now. This is from 2012. The sample size is only 9 fit males. So completely excluding females, completely excluding those who are not fit. So I already had issues walking into the study, but it's fine. If this is all I can find, I have to be okay with it. So in this study, they were looking at exercise-associated muscle cramps, and muscle cramping is something that musicians might have to deal with during performance. And what they did in this study was they either had 0, 1, or 2 servings of bananas after 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise. And they then measured the concentration of potassium. So what they found was that there was indeed more potassium after consumption, but, and they measured this through the blood. They did blood tests. But what they found was that this was a marginal increase, and it was still within normal clinical values. And it wasn't enough potassium to treat acute exercise-associated muscle cramps. So, and this study, even though, like, it wasn't a big finding, it was a very small study, which I understand. Like, you only have so much funding. It's expensive to have any sort of human trial, because you have to get an IRB and you have to get a lot of approval, and the lab tests too are also super expensive. So with their resources, I totally understand. And I think we can also make some interesting correlations or conclusions from this as well. Even though people did have 1 to 2 servings of bananas, this is about the normal amount of bananas that we would have before a performance. Like, no one's going to sit down and eat 20 bananas. That first sounds gross. And secondly, like, you're going to get sick. Like, you can't have that many bananas. But it just tells us that our bodies, even though we can have an increase in certain minerals, nutrients, etc., our cells are always going to strive to make homeostasis, which means that everything has to be in a perfect level. So even though our cells may intake more salt or more potassium, it will compensate in such a way in order to make sure that things are maintained. And yes, Jess does make a really good point. You should not be consuming 20 bananas in like 1 hour. Do not do that. That's a horrible idea. But our cells are always going to strive to maintain homeostasis. So also, like, eating turkey for tryptophan content in order to relax yourself, that is also debunked. Because even though turkey is claimed to have more tryptophan, it's actually the same amount as any other poultry, such as turkey, or such as chicken, or even pork products. It actually just goes back to the point that it's important just to eat well, in general. That way, if your body is in homeostasis and it's the healthiest that it can be before encountering the stress of having a performance. Oh my gosh, it's already 9:54. Horrible time management this time. All right, so the last point that I'm going to make before we open up for a couple questions and answers is I listened to other podcasts before coming into the Molecast, and one of the podcasts I listened to is a podcast called Mind Over Finger, and it's about mindful practicing. The host, Dr. Renee Paul Gaudier, has such a wonderful voice, and she invites a lot of different musicians on her podcast to talk about different practice strategies and practice techniques that she has. One of her episodes, maybe it was last year or the year prior, I don't remember, is a book that she referred to known as The Inner Game of Music. And this really is such a helpful book. If you haven't read it before, I strongly suggest that you do. It's by Barry Green. And the last 3 points about performance anxiety that I want to talk about is to shift the focus off of the fear to enjoy the enjoyment that you're providing. Don't focus on what can go wrong and avoid self-doubt. So just a couple points that quotes that I want to leave you with from the book before we open up to question and answer is reasons for choosing music. Ask yourself how listening to or playing music makes you feel. Music can be a way for us to experience love, excitement, joy, sadness, and even spiritual fulfillment. And list the ways in which it affects you. And the question that the author prompts us is, do you enjoy sharing music with others? If so, how? And in the book, he suggests to keep this list handy. So when you feel stressed, to go back and look at it and remind yourself why you're actually, performing music. What's the point? Another interesting quote that the author provides us with is from his chapter, The Power of Trust. And yeah, I am somewhat trusting. I'm not as trusting as other people, but on the spectrum, I probably fall in the middle. And this really addresses us to the point of avoiding self-doubt. And in real life situations, he says, these doubts and worries tend to get tangled up in one another. The person who's embarrassed by the spaghetti stain might say they were worried because it made them feel out of control of the social situation, or that their anxiety about how they looked was making them so tense that they weren't sure their sensitive musicianship would be able to come through. However, in general, the obstacles to our trusting tend to cluster in one of 3 areas. Which barriers most often come between you and your ability to trust? Having problems with your self-image, doubting your control of the situation, or doubting your abilities. And I felt that he really hit the point right on the head with it, which is why we have so much self-doubt, because we are trying to answer or have problems answering one of those 3 questions. So with that, let's recap into what we learned today from today's Molecast. That in music, we have a variety of different stressors that weigh upon us during our music production. Pleasing people, auditions, sight reading, stand partners, etc. Tough teachers, politics. And that these stressors can be really categorized as either being a part of an acute stress response, or if they're being prolonged, a chronic stress response. And acute responses are okay. Our body manages the stress in such a way that it conserves energy and directs it towards managing the stress response that's in front of us. But a chronic stress response is not as good, because what happens is it wears upon our bodies. We have a less reduced immune response to different pathogens that we could be perceiving in our environment. And it's also causing other changes, such as modifications of complex cognitive behavior, decision-making, monitoring social behaviors, emotions, and memories in our brains, as well as regulating the balance of other processes such as salt and water, cardiovascular health, etc. So, in order to reduce and relieve stress, again, I suggest that you be observant, talk to your healthcare provider, get regular exercise, try a relaxing activity, setting goals and priorities, and most importantly, staying connected. As I look at the chat, saying goodbye to Lemon. Bye, Lemon. And, as we get ready for all of the performances coming up this week, it's also important to know that anxiety is just a part of the performance. But if we do a lot of prep work beforehand by practicing, preparing, being organized, visualizing what can and cannot go wrong during the performance, establishing a routine, this can all help us, as well as being familiar with your space. I have a star right there. These all help with performance anxiety and managing the anxiety the day of, so we can really try to enjoy the performance as best as we can. Not saying that you will, but you can enjoy it as much as you can. So with that, thank you guys so much for listening to today's Molecast. I'll open it up right now for questions. If you do have a question, just use this. Nope, not that hashtag. That's the wrong one. Hashtag question. And I can answer questions for about 10 minutes. And then we'll end the Molecast from there. Oh, thank you guys so much. Thank you. Aw, thank you guys so much. It looks like we don't actually have a lot of questions this time, so maybe we'll just go ahead and end the episode. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the Science server or DM me. Also, the Molecast episode, the YouTube video will be up hopefully around lunchtime, as long as my computer behaves. And the next episode for Molecast will be August 30th, time to be determined. Again, probably between 9 and noon. It might be a little later this time, Australia, Asia gang, just to give Pacific Standard Time a chance to also enjoy the podcast. So we'll see. And then next episode will be about learning. So how do musicians learn? Learning a new instrument, learning good practice techniques, learning sheet music, etc. So hopefully you guys can enjoy that. Always, please feel free to reach out on episode suggestions, or if you're interested in guest hosting a Molecast with me, reach out and we can discuss that as well. Again, thank you guys so much. If you're interested in listening to past YouTube channels, you can go into the Science server, and all the past Molecast episodes are in the Science server. Again, thank you guys so much for all of your support and all of your love. And I'll chat with you again soon. Bye.